Hey there, Dice Camera action fans and fans of D&D overall. Hi, my name is Matthew, your friend, the Sage of Sorcery, and welcome to episode 4 of the Waffle Press. Boom. As always, we have a lot to talk about today. It might be a little bit of a shorter episode today, given that Dice Camera Action was it was fairly simple this episode, around for episode 88. Still enjoyable, but simple nonetheless, and very straightforward. The characters had a chance, the players, had a chance to flex their comedic muscles a little bit to all of our enjoyment. I certainly had a good time watching the episode. We're going to talk to you about quite a few things today. Really excited to share some hag information for you. So we're going to talk about what works and what irks for episode 88. And we're going to talk a little bit about lore you can't ignore. We're going to get into the history of some of the most famous hags in Dungeons and Dragons. And also, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a 3rd edition campaign setting that we got with the Open Gaming license that opened up a little bit more information and kind of made hags a bigger part of the world. So we're going to talk about that. And then we might jump down the rabbit hole here and there with a few ideas. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So, episode 88, I thought, was particularly interesting. We jumped into the bodies, or rather, we jumped into the experience of the awful crew. And as Chris Perkins was promising us, they were awful. They were awful in a number of ways. I was really terribly curious about what direction he was going to take them in. I did not necessarily think that he was going to make them 3rd level. I thought he might start a little bit higher because I thought that maybe the point was eventually we would bring them into conflict with the Waffle crew. But if the Waffle crew is playing the awful crew, then that gives us maybe a bit of a different direction that Chris is going to head in on there, which I think is terribly interesting. One of the things that I realized by starting them at 3rd level, it made a lot of sense, because if you consider the fact that they weren't created but too long ago, they should be low level. They shouldn't be equal to the same level of power as the Waffle crew. And so that makes a whole lot of sense, having them stay at that level. And then I also thought, if he's going to start him at 3rd level, I wonder if he has the intention of floating back and forth and starting them on kind of a multiverse kind of different campaign. Maybe we'll come back to the awful crew every 10 episodes and check in with them, or every 12 episodes. Maybe the things that they do will echo and have an impact on the Waffle crew, and maybe the things that they encounter. Maybe they'll create pitfalls for them or problems. They are connected because both the Awful and the Waffle crew are connected through the hags, and the hags must have some kind of ulterior motive. And then we're coming up on episode 90, which is the end of the season, and Chris will want to end on a dramatic cliffhanger. He will surely want to end on something that has Anna hiding off of the screen and has Jared with his whoopee around his head, and has Nate saying the F-bomb, and has Holly, freaking out to various degrees to match her character. So I'm sure Chris will want to end on some kind of a dramatic note. He likes to do that. It's one of the things that makes him a good DM. And so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where we go. I'm curious to see where it goes. So let me tell you what some things that I thought that worked and some things that I thought irked. I really thought that the idea of their connection to the hags, that works. I don't necessarily want to see them independent. I mean, if the hags end up getting killed somewhere in the long run, I guess that's okay, but I like them being connected to the hags. Hags make really good evil overlords, and which is one of the descriptions that you get in 2nd edition D&D. It frequently talked about the hags having a lot of goblins or giants or ogres in their employ. They'd have a network of people working for them for their horrible schemes, whatever it was they were trying to do. So I like that idea of them being in charge of the awful crew. And then the sack of evil. I absolutely loved the sack of evil. I love the idea that they're looking for people to stick in the sack. I thought it was interesting that they were looking for evil people to stick in the sack. I thought that was interesting, and I'm wondering, why do they need evil people? And I know I'm confident that Chris is going to come back to that at some point here in the near future. Not sure how we're going to wrap up by episode 90. And I also don't think it matters all that much because we're not going to take that long of a hiatus before the campaign starts right back up again and we jump right back into it. And so I don't know that that is going to make much of a difference. And I wonder if the Awful Crew is going to be around for a bit longer. Tell you the truth, what I thought about the Awful Crew is I didn't think they were so much awful as pathetic. Being that they're such lower level than the other characters, and their character, not in the D&D sense, but their character in the moral sense, is really quite pathetic, I was going to say. So some of the things that I thought were interesting, or maybe this is something that irked, I'm not sure. They're out there and they're trying to be bad. They're doing bad things, you know. And I thought it was great to have Anna take the Dungeon Master's seat. If you have watched her on Misclicks, she is Dungeon Mastering this season. She's doing a very good job. It's not about the rules, and I think Anna is proving that on Misclicks. It isn't about the rules. It's about narrating your story and opening up options for the players and making split decisions. And I thought Anna did a really good job here out of the starting gate, both in Misclicks, where she's DMing this season, and also in this episode of Dice Camera Action. I liked when she put on the hat. I thought that worked, and she was like, "All right, fools." And I think maybe what everybody else was thinking was, "All right, but she wasn't going to say it, which is, it's classy of her. Anna's classy. So I thought that was interesting. And I did enjoy that. I liked the sack of evil. I didn't think that they were very impressive as evil, but I also don't know that they were supposed to be all that impressive. This episode was a huge exercise in comic relief. And I think that just like I thought in the previous episode, when halfway through we kind of jumped to comedy, of course, Nate generally jumps to the dark humor, and I've talked about that in previous episodes. He doesn't do the drama. I don't think he enjoys it. I don't think he's comfortable with it yet. Give him a few years. Who knows? Maybe he keeps playing D&D longer, and maybe he'll get comfortable with that narrative style. I don't know. But I did think that was interesting, and I do think, like I thought before, that the comedy is necessary. We just had these heavy episodes, and Evelyn's dead, and everybody's mourning her, and there's weeping, and I'm singing on the last episode some kind of, song on behalf of the fan. I mean, it's just, we're all having emotional reactions, and I can feel on the subreddit that has calmed down a little bit, which is good. I think it needs to calm down. Everybody needs to just chill out and take a breath, up the Xanax, whatever, and just kind of relax a little bit before we head back into getting Evelyn back or into whatever is going to come next. So I think that'll be interesting. I did think they were pathetic, like I was saying before. So, and the reason being because we move into this and their attempts at evil, they're looking for someone to stick in the sack, to send it back. They have the sack being some kind of a portal back to the Hags area. I don't know why they need evil people. I'm curious about that. But I thought, I'll tell you what I thought was interesting. They were looking for someone evil, and I thought, wouldn't it be so much more evil had they tried to corrupt someone and then stick them in the sack? I thought, well, you know what? That would have been much worse. That's the kind of brand of evil that is far more significant and has far more lasting consequences, I think. I mean, it's one thing if you play an evil character and you're running around stabbing people and doing whatnot, but if you corrupt other people and then you send them out into the world to do your corrupt little bidding, I think that's way more evil, and I think it would have made for a way more interesting session than just havoc in the marketplace, which is what we got. So the pathetic level, I guess that irked a little bit. I was like, oh, come on, we can do better evil than that, But then again, it was comedy, so I'm not sure that it was meant to be anything more than just some fun, exercising and stretching their legs. And maybe that's something that the Waffle Crew players will get a little bit more comfortable with. Have any of them ever even done an evil campaign before? I'm going to talk a little bit about that, go into some history of that in D&D when we get to Lore You Can't Ignore. But maybe it was just them getting their feet wet, and that's okay. If this is their first attempt at evil and they're just kind of stretching their legs, I think it was okay. I thought it was interesting. So they killed a dinosaur and they terrorized an inn. And I thought that was interesting. Would have been better, I think, to see them tempt people. And then Chris Chris showed us his experience in dealing with evil campaigns, as he has his little imp polymorph into a crow and pluck out the eye of the waitress. Anna raised an interesting rule point on there when she was talking about a called shot. In second edition, if you wanted to pull off a really specific wounding maneuver like that, you had to make a called shot. And the DM would tell you, okay, you need to hit the following armor class, and they could make it as high as they wanted or as low as they wanted. And so that was generally what you wanted to do if you wanted to pull off something spectacular. In fourth edition or third edition, called shots I think pretty much disappeared, and it was, if you want to pull that off, then you have to take the feat, or you need to have a very specific spell that's going to do whatever you want to. Come in fourth edition, and I think they tried to translate that into skills. You'd have to make a skill check before you made your attack, or you would need to make a really high skill check in order to pull something off. They tried to make the fourth edition skill set much more loose and simple, and they failed at it, to be honest with you. I don't think Chris is watching this, so I'm not particularly worried about hurting his feelings, and I'm sorry if it does, but the fact of the matter is, fourth edition skills were just kind of not specific enough. They were a little bit too general. They didn't get into the kind of specializations that I think characters would have wanted. And so as a result, we get to fifth edition here, and we'd like to pull off something like a called shot from second edition, but we can't, because we're like, I don't know what the mechanic is. And so Chris tells her, you're the DM, figure it out, basically. I guess that irks a little bit. I'd like to see a mechanic like that. But then again, if my character is the one being attacked by the villain, I don't want them just making a high die 20 roll and plucking out my eye. I don't think you should get to pluck out my eye unless you have a feat that lets you do that, or unless you have some kind of orb of eye plucking. I'm not sure what that looks like, or anyway, so I don't know. That part of it was the rules part of it was a little bit irksome, but Chris showed us when he goes plucking out this waitress's eye that he totally has played the evil campaign before. Obviously, as long as he's been playing D&D, and that's not an age joke, as long as he's been playing D&D, I'm sure he's had the opportunity to do that. And it's kind of interesting because he got pretty dark there. Strix is wandering through the marketplace, throwing fireballs, proclaiming her destiny, and I'm like, Holly usually is a lot more, I guess I would say, deft. She's a lot more deft. She's a lot more adroit when it comes to role play opportunities like this. But I guess she's been busy. They've all got PAX. They're all at PAX this weekend, PAX East, and so who knows what time she's had to prepare. It was interesting. I think we got some typical Nate preparation. When Anna asks him what does evil Paulton look like, he was like, I'm like, I can tell we've put a ton of thought into this. So we got Dracula, I guess, or he starts describing Straw, but whatever, that's fine. It does bring up a point that I wanted to talk about, and that is that there really is room at the table for every depth and every kind of player that you have, and there's room for people who are lightly invested. I don't know if many of you have read Confessions of a Part-Time Sorceress by Shelley Mazzanoble, but if you have not read that book, I would really recommend it. If you're a longtime D&D player, I would recommend it. It is hilarious. It's about Shelley's misadventures as a Dungeons & Dragons employee at Wizards of the Coast. She's a brand manager there, I believe, and about how she gets into D&D. And it's hilarious, and her mother was terrified when she heard it. They're making you play D&D? Can they do that? And it's very, very funny. And if you're not a longtime player, she wrote the book for you. If you have not played D&D, then she's writing her kind of dipping her feet into it. And when she starts off, she's getting a lot of hand-holding, and that's okay. One of the players in my current campaign that I'm playing, he's the one who it's harder to get together with him. He cancels more often than everybody else does. We're always waiting. Everybody else confirms, and then we're waiting on him. He's a good guy, and we love him, but he's to the point where he's that's the time that he has to devote to it. But he loves D&D, and he was just, in fact, 2 weekends ago at a party we were all at, he was describing and he was talking up D&D to one of the visitors that was at the party. And so that's okay. People of all different levels can and should be able to access the game. We should make a place for them at the table. Now, I realize that some of us, like, who are hardcore, like me, I've been playing for about 20 years, right? My campaign world is really quite complex. It's advanced. I've run multiple campaigns in it. Things change in the history. I know who the NPCs are. I can tell you things about all the kingdoms and the relationships between them. So players like me who, have been in the hobby for a long time, let's make sure that we're not gatekeeping or whatever, gatekeeping, gate guarding, whatever the term is. I'm a little bit new to that. I never, I'm generally just one of those people who's always wanted everybody to get involved in it. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. So while we watch Nate flounder sometimes, recognizing that either he may be a newer player or that's the time that he has to devote to it, he's got an album coming out and he's going to be going on tour really soon. I think it's good to remember. So, and throw a little love Nate's way. So anyway, that was interesting. I did laugh very hard when we got Paulton's version of evil is he starts abusing the waiter, and I thought it was cool, and I'll tell you why I liked it. It's not the evil that I think would be impressive, but like I said, maybe they're just flexing their muscles here for the first time. But it does bring up a good point. I love that quote. You're not a nice person if you're not nice to the waiter or the waitress. I love that. I think that's a really good point. You aren't a nice person if you're not nice to the waiter, or if you switch the kind of person you are depending on whom you're around, then obviously you're not a very consistent person, and maybe you need to re-examine. So, good point. But it was funny, he's tormenting the waitress, and then Chris, of course, kicks it up a notch, and I liked that. So, anyway, episode was kind of fun. I liked the whole interlude with the hags, and they have to stuff somebody in the bag, and I want to introduce a little bit more of you about that. So it was a good episode. I liked it overall. The idea of the hag's eye, that's something, if you're not familiar with it, that is something that D&D has been doing as far back as I know, and it's in movies too. If you watch the movie Clash of the Titans, or Percy Jackson, and there are 3 hags in the taxi car, they're all using one eye to see, right? Well, hags in D&D don't generally do that. Hags in D&D can generally see just fine, depending on what may or may not be growing over their eye. But hags in D&D have typically used an eye that they disguise as a gem. They enchant it and they send it out, and then the hag's eye becomes their viewing glass, their scrying tool, to be able to spy on who or what or wherever they want to. So it's interesting. So I was glad that we included that. If a hag shows up in your D&D campaign, that is something that you want to really play it up. I mean, hags can be thrown about willy-nilly, and that's okay. But they make much better, I guess I would say they make much better lead villains, I guess, of a kind than they do just a random, monster that you encounter inside of whatever. So, anyway, looks like we have a phone. I'll get that later. Anyway, so I have an article that I want to show you that's really cool. Speaking of hags, right? To kind of just launch in with lore you can't ignore, I have an article from This Dragon Magazine. This right here is back when they used to publish Dragon Magazine as something that you could order. And I got to tell you, as a kid, I loved these. I don't have all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but I do have a nice collection of about, I guess, probably 20 or 30 little magazines of Dragon Magazine. And this right here is Dragon number 300. So it says 26 years of Dungeons and Dragons. And this one was a really interesting one, because this issue focused on Vile Darkness and how dark do you want to take a campaign. And there's some great stuff in here that I kind of wanted to introduce to you, given that this is the first time we've dipped our fingers into an evil campaign. So one of the things that I want to talk to you first about is this article, and it's by Monty Cook. So if those of you who don't know who Monty Cook is, he worked on quite a number of third edition D&D materials. I imagine he's probably retired now. Maybe he still works at Wizards. I don't know. I doubt it. But he wrote this article about how far do you go with an evil campaign. So I'm just going to read a little bit of the part of the beginning of it to you. Since, I don't know, these are probably hard to find. I don't know if they're archived somewhere. They used to be, where you could log on if you had a D&D Insider subscription. I don't even think they sell those anymore. They're trying to kill 4th edition, I think, and everything related to it. So the digital tools are not available for new subscribers, unfortunately, which is really irritating, but whatever. Anyway, he says, at its most basic level, Dungeons & Dragons is a game of good versus evil. Usually, but not always, the PCs are heroes who seek adventure and help right the wrongs of the world. Depending on the campaign or your game group, the level of evil will vary. Some campaigns, such as those that have a horror theme, feature darker, more evil elements, and are generally more gruesome and violent. Deciding to allow certain acts of evil or mature themes, such as sexual content, is a decision that shouldn't be made lightly, and certainly it is a decision that every member of the group should help make. The first question that must be answered is, how much is too much? In other words, how far do you go? Do you keep things simple and avoid thinking too much about the actions of the evil people in the campaign? Or do you provide vivid details of such things? Do you show vile behavior and gruesome violence on stage or off? How you and the rest of your group answers these questions will shape your campaign. Once you make a choice as to the level of vile or mature content your campaign will have, you should attempt to remain fairly consistent. Springing something horrific and vile on other players when they are used to a lighthearted game can be jarring and uncomfortable. Likewise, something lighthearted and silly can sometimes ruin the atmosphere of a dark and serious game. So this is really an absolutely fantastic article. And it raises some questions that I think are things that we need to consider. Chris is really good at this, the way that Chris is really good about, almost everything as a DM. I'm sure he's good at everything. He fluctuates the way that we all do. But it's interesting because, we encountered previously, remember, when he had the Waffle crew, die, age 50 years, whatever, there's that whole thing of Juniper was dead, and Anna is an animal lover. Holly is an animal lover, and I think they're both vegan or vegetarians, and they're both very sensitive to animals. That being the case, even an imaginary animal, even cruelty to an imaginary animal, I think is unacceptable to both of those players. And you'll notice Chris had Juniper's little skeleton in her chest plate, and Juniper dies, but he immediately provides a way out. Juniper gets resurrected. I think that Juniper is the only mouse in the history of D&D who has ever been resurrected. Anyway, I don't know that I would have gone that far, but it's proof that Chris is really good at balancing this out. And when you're dungeon mastering, I think it's a good thing. It's part of that compact with your players. How far is too far? There are things that I really don't want described in my D&D game. I've played characters who were, I guess you would call them, had a promiscuous background. I've played characters who were a little bit darker, a little bit more murderous intent, but, just hinted at it or come around to describe it, or had them express temptation, but, generally didn't spend a ton of time there. Because like I said, I'm a munchkin. If you've watched my other 3 episodes of the Waffle Press, I have a munchkin inside of me. I love the roleplay. Don't get me wrong. A character to me, if all they are is a collection of stats and abilities, I lose interest very quickly. I'm done, right? There's got to be roleplay. If I don't get roleplay during the session, I get bored. My brother, who I may be playing with tomorrow, actually, huge munchkin, but ironically, he starts to hate his character once there's not enough plot or story. He just gets bored too. So he kind of leaps on top of the technical side, maybe doesn't realize how important the other side is, which is really annoying. But anyway, that being said, it's a good question. I think Chris does a good job balancing it out. So we get the awful crew. Yes, they're murdering people. Yes, they're kidnapping people. And Chris is the one, ironically to me, who goes the farthest or furthest with plucking out the eye of the waitress. That's torture. And so, but then again, Chris is playing a devil. an imp is a devil, and I think it's a devil. I'm pretty sure an imp is a devil. I think a quasit is from the abyss, and an imp is from the nine hells. But I could be mixing those up. Whatever. Anyway, they're evil. They're both from the lower planes. So that being the case, thinking about that, I thought it was kind of a good warm up to evil. I don't know how bad it's going to get. I don't know how evil they'll get. Maybe it'll get a little bit more serious. But also, Dice Camera Action has a really large audience. So I'd be curious to have you guys talk about maybe in the subreddit once I upload this what you feel like is too far. Maybe that's something that you want to answer in the subreddit, or when I upload this to YouTube, you can leave it in the chat. Anyway, so wanted to show you a little article here. In this same Dragon Magazine 300, we have this really awesome article called By the Hands of Hags. And this, my friends, is so cool because this article details a lot of the items that hags make. And hags themselves, when they show up and they have magic items, those magic items are crafted by hags, and they should reflect that, right? That's one of the things that makes hags so fun. This is not the shining magical wand of the elven wizardess princess, right? It's not going to be inlaid with filigree and gold. It's going to be made with pixie wings and like calcified ogre piss or whatever. I don't know. So anyway, that being the case, so we've got By the Hands of Hags. Listen to some of these items from this article. Really cool. So one of the ones I had is called the Crone's Cane. The Crone's Cane is a tool suitable to the sly trickery of the aged. A gnarled sliver of stout wood. The only features of the cane to distinguish it from a more mundane item are the transitional images carved along its length. These carvings detail the journey from birth to old age, showing a featureless figure grow from a crawling babe to an upright adult, ending in a hunched back elder at the cane's head. So this cane looks really cool, right? It's intricate, but it's got these, from baby to old age here, right? Now here's the cool thing about this cane. I had a character who was actually a hag. I was using the stats from the Unapproachable East Forgotten Realms manual for 3rd edition for the hag spawn race. And so I was playing a hag, and she was a sorcerer, because I don't mind playing male or female characters. Whatever idea I get in my mind for the character is the idea that I get. Now, since I'm the Dungeon Master too, I'm used to portraying both. I just go for it, right? So this character, I actually had her craft the Crone's Cane, and it was awesome because I tell you what it does. When you get hit with this cane, you have to make a DC 20 saving throw, or it transforms you into a withered old crone or old age, and it drains 1d6 strength and dexterity. So you turn ugly, and it drains you of vitality. Basically, it's a fantastic magic item, right? So anyway, once affected, a creature can't be affected again by it unless the effect is dispelled, right? So, but it doesn't matter because they're permanently drained of strength and dexterity. How cool is that, right? So other things we have in here, we've got a bone rattle. It exemplifies the hag's hatred of youth and their lust to spread suffering. So there's a picture of the Crone's Cane. You can see that right there. It's not really huge detail right there, okay? And then, of course, we have other things in here. There's a thing called a Bramble Man. He's a strange and powerful magic item that looks a little more like a 2-foot-tall bundle of roots and twigs, crudely shaped into a humanoid form. Once the command word is spoken, the next creature to touch the Bramble Man becomes the target of the spell, okay? So anyway, a magical link is formed between the target and the Bramble Man, and basically it kind of works like a voodoo doll, right? So it's really cool. We've got the bone rattle. It's triggered by an intentional shaking, right? So you shake it, and all creatures within 25 must succeed at a DC saving throw, 13 will, or be bombarded with hideous and mental images of pain and death, right? So anyway, they're shaken, or they run in fear, yada, yada, yada. But anyway, and then, of course, there's the Head of the Loveless. Isn't that lovely? Of course, there's going to be a shrunken head magic item. There's an item called Maiden's Hands that are made with, like, real fingers, right? Creepy right there. Allows somebody to transform into a maiden and hide in there. Anyway, really cool article called By the Hands of Hags. And I just wanted to share that with you because I love the idea of the sack, right? The sack that is a portal for transporting people back to the hag's lair. It's not, an iron circlet. It's not, a variety of different things. It's a burlap sack, right? And if a hag made it, just because it's got powerful magic doesn't mean it has to be attractive. So when you're role-playing or dungeon mastering hags, that's something to keep in mind, right? Anyway, really great issue of Dragon Magazine, really good article in there, and really good stuff. So other things that I wanted to share with you about the hags. Hags have a long history in D&D, like I was saying. I'm going to show you a picture of another really famous hag. Her name is Malagard, and she is the Hag Countess of Malbolge, the Lord of the Sixth Layer of the Nine Hells, right? So there are 9 hells, and the interesting about that is every time we have an update to Dungeons and Dragons, there is a shakeup in the Archdevil's hierarchy, right? So right now, the Hag Countess is out, as far as I know, unless that's changed in 5th edition, and then the layer of the 6 is Glacia, whatever her name is. She's the daughter of Asmodeus, who is the Lord of the Nine. He is the greater god of sin, basically, or at least he was. We'll see if that evolves. But before his daughter Glacia was Lord of the Sixth, there was Malagard, the Hag Countess. And there's a pretty cool picture of her in there. There she is. Sorry, I'm not good at this. Okay. There we go. Isn't she just beautiful? Look at her right there. Anyway, that's Malagard, right? So Malagard is pretty interesting. She actually staged a coup in order to take her place. There was a Lord of the Sixth Layer, and his name was Malak. You might recognize him. I think they named one of the characters in Mortal Kombat Malak, who was a demon from the Nine Hells. But anyway, the hells are important in Mortal Kombat mythology, so if you're interested, there's a connection there. Anyway, she was a prominent member of Malak's court, and some say his lover as well. She encouraged Malak to join Baalzebul's rebellion against Asmodeus, the ruler of the Nine Hells, and they lost, right? Well, Malagard somehow becomes the new Lord of the Sixth Layer, right? Or at least she was. Now, hey, not to spoil anything, but Malagard gets booted out, and I'll tell you what happened to her, because it's really, really cool. So if you don't like spoilers, you're definitely watching the wrong show. But you can click off or wait a minute. Malagard actually was slain by Glacia, and Asmodeus' daughter, and she transforms her skull into her new palace. So she takes Malagard, the Hag Countess, kills her, and it magically expands her skull to the size of a fortress, right? And that's where Glacia rules from. And so, anyway, interesting hag that we have there. I got another one for you right here. It was very interesting. And once again, we're dealing with the powers, as Strix calls them right here. I got a nasty piece of work here. Her name, my friends, is Seligune. Got a good picture. There we go. There's a good picture right there. Her name is Seligune. Seligune is actually the goddess of the hags. She is the patron of hags, including the wretched night hags of Hades, whom she rules from her filthy bone-strewn cave hallway in a vast mountain of dead black rock. So anyway, she's an interesting figure here because Seligune is supposedly, she's a Fey goddess. Now, the hags were not Fey until, as far as I know, until I think 4th edition. And then in 4th edition, I think the hags became Fey. And that makes a lot of sense, right? That's when we got the Feywild expansions and all this information about the Feywild or what is also called the realm of fairy, right? Which had always been hinted at in D&D, but which we'd never spent a ton of time. Well, we had an explosion of lore on the Feywild, and we can talk about that in greater depth. But anyway, basically, the goddess of the Feywild supposedly is Titania, which is a name that should sound familiar to you. Titania is the name of the fairy queen from mythology. Titania is the fairy queen. Shakespeare uses her in A Midsummer Night's Dream, I believe. You have Titania and Oberon. I have a Dragon magazine where Titania and Oberon are featured as Fey Lords. They're not called Archfey yet, and they're in this book as well. This book is called Monster Mythology. Probably should have showed you that first one too, sorry. This book is called A Guide to Hell, and this is by Chris Promise, not Chris Perkins, Chris Promise. And it's a really interesting book. Second edition was kind of an explosion in D&D for lore. So if you love lore, you really should pick up some second edition D&D materials, because they took first edition, and second edition took what first edition only hinted at and just expanded it all over the place. So any second edition book you get is most likely going to be chocked full of lore. Third edition was more about player characters options, right? It was an explosion of feats and classes and prestige classes, hundreds of prestige classes that your character could level into. Fifth edition seems to be a balance of first through third. Not much has stuck around from fourth edition. Chris has mentioned from fourth edition that he loves minions, which is something that maybe has stuck around. I don't know. I haven't played a ton of fifth edition yet. But anyway, interestingly enough. So this is another second edition book. I have a great big collection called Monster Mythology. And we get Selagun, the hag goddess, in here, right? And she's a nasty piece of work. Now, supposedly, the Fey powers are good gods. They're kind of like the Seldarine, who are the brothers and sisters of the woods. That's the elven gods, Corellin Lorethian, Sehanin Moonbow. One of the things that I liked about 4th edition was that they decided that there were too many gods, and there are hundreds of gods. There's a joke about it in one of the books that I think I've already mentioned, that Ilsenstein, the god of the Mind Flayer, says there's so many gods in the Forgotten Realms, he wouldn't be surprised if there was a god with dominion over ale mugs and tableware. And so they trimmed it down by saying, these other gods are just, aspects of the same being, right? So Selune, who is the goddess of the moon, and Sehanin Moonbow are the same person in 4th edition. Sehanin is just her elven aspect, right? Or the elven incarnation of her, which I think is really interesting. So the Fey gods are supposed to be largely benevolent, if not capricious at times, right? Selagun, however, is vile and evil. So how does she get in there? Well, supposedly, according to this book, Selagun is Titania's sister, and they're connected in some powerful mystical way, to where if Titania dies, Selagun dies, but if Selagun dies, Titania dies. And so they kind of tolerate her, interestingly enough. And then, you get a lot of things. It describes her in here. Selgrin, she's a rag. She's exactly what you would expect. She's worshipped like Talos. She's worshipped out of fear. Whenever she shows up to see hags, it's usually to take a magic item that they have that she wants. So she's an awful creature, but she's interesting. And that's another piece of lore that we get about where hags come from, right? So if you're interested, I would definitely recommend picking this book up. It is fascinating, but there you go. Selagun, goddess of the hags. There's another famous hag figure right there. So hags, altogether interesting. Absolutely love them. Want to talk to you a little bit about another campaign setting that put hags kind of in the forefront of the campaign world, and where they have their hands in kind of like earth-shaking events and the history of the world, right? And that campaign would be this one by Sword and Sorcery Studios, okay? That campaign is the Scarred Lands. It's their setting. This is legacy that we get from the Open Gaming license during 3rd edition, okay? So Sword and Sorcery Studios gives us a rich world called the Scarred Lands. And why are they called the Scarred Lands? They're called that because their world was ravaged by a war between the gods and the Titans. And ravaged in the way that it's not a safe world by any stretch of the imagination. It's deadly. There's evidences of corruption and destruction across the world, all over the world. It's barely safe to leave city. Points of light, like that 4th edition concept, right? So anyway, in here, we get a really interesting figure who is the reason why hags take such a level of prominence, right? And her name is Mormo, the Mother of Witches. Mormo is a really interesting critter, and you'll recognize the name Mormo both from, I believe it is the Black Cauldron series. I think there's a witch named Mormo in that. And then you're looking also at the movie Stardust. So Mormo is one of the names of the witches, the coven that's after the the heart of the star, right? Mormo, Confusa, and then the head one, Michelle Pfeiffer plays her. I can't remember her name right now. But anyway, Mormo is the mother of witches, the mother of serpents, the queen of witches, corruption's dam, the lady of venom, the scaled horror, the hag's midwife. By all of these names and more was the Titan Mormo known. Mormo rarely manifested her physical form, only threats to her servants by other Titans, and great rituals performed by her worthiest of children induced her to gather her essence in one place. When she came, either in answer to threat or ritual, Mormo called serpents from miles around, gathering them into one place. From this mass of vipers, Mormo formed her body, a towering creature of vaguely feminine shape. The blackest of serpent bodies served to form her wicked gaze, and serpents trailed down to form her writhing, horrific locks. So anyway, Mormo is huge into serpents, but she's equally big into hags. And because of that, she's called the hag's midwife. She was the mother of hags in the Scarred setting. Absolutely fascinating setting. Now, another book that I got from this setting is called Creature Collection. Okay? This book is absolutely fantastic if you like different varieties of hags. Now, we have three main varieties of hags in Dungeons and Dragons. The first one is called the Anise. I don't know who decided on that name, but I probably would have vetoed it. It's a little too close to another word. Anyway, and then you have the Sea Hag, which is kind of an aquatic version of the hag, and then you have the green hag. The Anise hag is kind of like a troll hag. She's claws. She's that beast woman from legend, right? The Anise hag is I eat the little children, and I'm huge, so I can do it. The sea hag is, I think, I don't remember what her special attack is, but obviously she's aquatic version. The green hag has a death glare. Just looking, the green hag is supposedly so hideous that to look at her can kill you. Causes actual damage to look at her. Anyway, so that's interesting. A ton of mother-in-law jokes coming. Anyway, so that being said, very, very interesting. Now, if you look at this book in the Scarred setting, they really open this up quite a bit to different kinds of hags. So if you look in here, it tells you a little bit more information about hags, how you become one, which Dragon Magazine published a bunch of ecology articles, and they explained how women become Anise, green, and sea hags, right? But I like this one a little bit more because it talks about a different way that any hag can be brought about. So it's called the metamorphosis. When a hag wants to create another hag, it says the hag feeds the woman a diet of strange fruits and herbs, raw fish, poisonous berries, gull's heads, fungal tea, or whatever bilious concoction is appropriate to begin the evolution. Step by step, the woman casts aside her humanity, or has it stripped from her by her grandmother. By the time she reaches late middle age, she has mastered the elemental ways of the hag woman. So we get the brine hag in here, and she's a lovely piece of work, right? And she's kind of a deep sea hag, kind of like the sea hag, but deeper. She can breathe water, she can scry. And all of these hags have levels in spellcaster, right? Then you get the cavern hag. She's like an underdark lovely. We love her right there. And then next to her, you get the ice hag. Isn't she absolutely fascinating? So they do mean elemental, and then the most powerful ones in the Scarred Lands are called moon hags, right? And they have dominion over lunar cycles and madness, and their magic is the strongest. You also get storm hags, who are constantly flying, can grapple you with their hair, and swamp hags, who are kind of like the green hag, swamp hags who have levels in druid and whatnot. Absolutely fascinating kind of lore, or at least I think it is. Hags being a big part of their world, right? Now, the goal of the hags in the Scarred Lands is interesting. Their goal is to resurrect the Titan Mormo, the mother of witches. And they want to resurrect her because in the Scarred Lands campaign setting, the gods were victorious in their victory over the Titans, and they found various ways to banish them, basically. So Mormo was torn to pieces, and ripped into shreds, and pieces of her are all over the place. The most powerful hag in the Scarred Lands is called the Blood Crone, and she gained her power because she devoured Mormo's heart. So she has Mormo's heart, and I guess she can puke it up at will. So, I guess she can puke it up and devour it at will. So the Blood Crone, anyway, is gathering bits of viscera and blood from Mormo in the hopes so that they can get enough of it together to resurrect her, right? So that's the plan, basically, of those hags, and it's interesting. Now, I'll show you one more thing from the Scarred Lands setting, because this one was, I thought, a fascinating idea, and it goes to show you just how far the hag's magic can go. So that's one of the things about D&D hags that's actually quite interesting. D&D hags have incredibly powerful magic when the good guys don't know what to do. Sometimes they'll go to hags because they have their own traditions, right? And they have their own way of casting spells, and it's obviously it's a dark and usually evil way, but it's interesting because they have power that the good guys sometimes don't know about or they can't access. So we find that interesting. So here is another hag that you will find interesting. Her name is Queen Gelida the Fair, Monarch of Calastia, okay? And if you take a look at her picture right there, okay, she's a bit of a bombshell. So, if you don't like busty hags, sorry about that. But anyway, she's not actually a full hag. She's a half hag. And she's a sorcerer level 18, right? So Gelida's history begins with a foundling infant left on a village wise woman's doorstep in the barbaric realm of Albadia. The old woman named Lilia secretly worshipped Mormo, mother of serpents. Convinced that she could never bear a child of her own, Lilia welcomed the infant as a blessing from her patron and swore to raise the child as a faithful follower of the serpent mother. Well, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Anyway, so Gelida grows up. She develops sorceress powers, right? Obviously, she's got hag blood in her, right? So one night she has a dream, right? She beholds a bent, hooded old woman leaning upon a gnarled staff for support. Evil black eyes stared at her from a haggard, wrinkled face. As Gelida watched, the figure's stature grew. She cast aside her hood, cloak, and cane, and revealed herself as a fearsome moon hag, tall, powerful, and deadly. Your mother gave you a human name, the hag said, in a voice like the scream of tortured souls. Yet the blood of Mormo flows in your veins. You were sired by a mortal father on a hag mother. We left you with your foster mother, knowing that if you grew, the change would come upon you. When you grew ill, I visited your mother and gave her a vial of our sacred mother's blood. That blood healed you, completed the change, and awoke your inner self. You enjoy the powers and protections of we hags, but outwardly you shall appear as one of the divine races. So, anyway, that makes her relatively interesting. She has hag powers and hag blood, the magic of the hags in her veins, but the corruption that generally is part of the curse, or whatever you want to call it, of being a hag is not evidenced anywhere with Gelida. Now, Gelida is interesting. She's the queen of Calastia. She marries King Verduk, who is, an incredibly powerful tyrant, and she actually loves him after a fashion, interestingly enough. But they make a terrible company, and they're a huge part of the lore of the Scarred Lands, right? So anyway, supposedly Gelida is supposed to be helping resurrect Mormo, but she's got her own agenda, and she is, an interesting character. So I don't know. I just wanted to give you guys quite a bit of information on hags, the history of hags, just how interesting and how big of an influence they can be in your campaign, and how fun they are to have as villains. So I don't know where Chris is going to take this. There's so much that could be done. There's a couple things about hags that I think Chris did a really good job with that are kind of staples. The first one being they are corruptions. They're corruptions of femininity in every way, right? Which is why they receive some bad press from some of the players, from some of the religious rights groups, from a lot of different people. But they're corruptions of femininity. They're corruptions of motherhood, and they represent a twisting, a warping, an evil, right? In most cases. And so that being the case, they should be evil. and they should be slightly mad, right? Hags don't rule the world because they're insane to a degree, you know. They live in their squalor, wretched, filthy, disgusting, Strix-like conditions, right? And interestingly enough, so it'd be really, wouldn't it be cool if Strix became, I mean, it almost seems like Strix is like halfway to Hag herself, right? Except she's not evil. Strix has, enormous amounts of compassion, which is a reflection of Holly's enormous amounts of compassion, which is one of the reasons why we love Holly the player, right? I think she's a great person. But anyway, so it'd be interesting to see where Chris goes with this. I'm not exactly sure where he's going to go. Right now, the Waffle Crew has a deal with the Hags, a deal that they don't need anymore, right? Because the death curse has been ended by Evelyn's sacrifice. So at what point will we come into conflict, and what do they have to do? Because another staple of Hags is that they make deals, right? You can make a pact with a hag. In fact, there have been, in different source books, published a hag version that's called the Pact Hag. There's also the Bure Hag, and dang it, that's downstairs in my new library, which is one of the reasons why I didn't publicize this episode as much as I might have previously. Because there's a Bure Hag who shows up in, I think, Neverwinter Nights 2 expansion, Mask of the Betrayer, which you get a lot of witchy stuff in there because of the witches of Rashomon, which is interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So that being the case, I don't know where Chris is going to take it. I think it would be cool if the Hags could stick around for a while, but I don't see the Waffle Crew necessarily putting up with that. They did, however, bargain for a scroll of resurrection. So it would appear that maybe they have their way of getting Evelyn back, but the Hags want bits of the Waffle Crew, which they're, knowing that clones are out there of them, evil clones most likely, being that they've been created by hag magic, it stands to reason that they're not going to pony up. So I don't know where we go from here. I mean, honestly, I feel like sometimes, most of the time, my brain can conjure up any number of different kinds of avenues or directions that we might head in. And at this time, I'm curious. I feel like there's a confrontation coming with the Waffle Crew and the Awful Crew, but they're not ready for it. They're only 3rd level. So how could that happen? Maybe they're going to hang back and assist, and the battle will be with the Hags themselves. I don't know. I'm not quite sure where Chris will go. It would be interesting. He may stick with the Awful Crew for the next 2 sessions, maybe episode 89 and 90. Maybe we'll end with the Awful Crew. Maybe he'll want to level them up until they can put up a fight, and then they'll fight each other. And won't that be a very strange kind of like dual personality fight, but still would be interesting to watch. So anyway, that ought to be interesting. I'd like that. If you like imps, I didn't bring the book up with me. I actually spent the weekend working on my library. I built these beautiful bookshelves with my brother, and they are now housing all of my D&D books and all of my Forgotten Realms books, so everything is within reach. The books by R.A. Salvatore, the Cleric Quintet. If you like imps, there's an imp that features very prominently in that series of books called Druzel. And Druzel, while he is a minion and a helper to various villains throughout the book series, it could be argued that Druzel is the biggest villain in the series. Druzel is the one who makes it from book 1 all the way to book 5, and Druzel is the source of a lot of horrible evil, and he really is he's just an imp, and yet he's the most corrupting force, and the reason why events spiral out of control all the way through the series. So if you want to read more about an imp, not a hag, then I would jump into the Cleric Quintet. Maybe I'll show it to you next time on episode 5 of the Waffle Press. But that's a little bit more about how efficient devils can be, tugging strings from the background. So anyway, can be very interesting. But that'll be it for today. So we're ending a little bit earlier than I normally end, just short of an hour here. Really excited for episode 89. I liked the comedic muscle flexing that we got in episode 88. Wasn't as much to the core. The Awful Crew is just kind of evil, little pathetic. Not really much of a fight at this point. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. But this is me. You can follow me at Sage of Sorcery 1 on Twitter, at Sage of Sorcery 1. My YouTube channel is also Sage of Sorcery. Type in Sage of Sorcery at Waffle Press. You can find me on YouTube. I'll upload this to YouTube relatively quickly. And until then, this is Sage of Sorcery saying that there are more of us than there are of them now. Have a great night.